with NCEA here in Washington, and my dear mother, God love her, I had told her that I had been offered that, but at the same time, my own diocese asked me to remain in the diocese and work in the position I'm in. And my dear mother, when I told her that I would be working in Philadelphia, she said to me, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to be the director of the CIA." And she said to me, "Why don't you turn that job in Washington down?" So, needless to say, it has been an interesting quite a few years in the Office of Catholic Education, and I have to say I love every bit of what I do. When I look at the topic that I'm going to address this afternoon, assessment, the question came to me that when you think of assessment, don't you think of questions? And when I think of assessment, I think of the questions, why do we have to do this? In some ways, it is like a little bit of a torture, both for the teachers and the students. But when we take a look at why it is we are doing assessments, we have to have a reason for everything that we do. And first and foremost, as Catholic educators, I can't separate the who I am from the what I am. We are equipping saints. We are preparing future saints for this life and the next. And in preparing for this presentation, I needed a little help from some of my little friends here. And all of the little friends I have in my presentation, they're all related to me. So I'm using pictures of all my grandnieces and grandnephews. So if you see all the little children here, they are definitely related to me. So I had authorization to use them. So when we take a look at who we are, what we're doing, you know, we have to, before we begin, we need to get one thing straight. We need to take a look at the key question. Is it assessment or is it evaluation? Okay? What are we really talking about? There seems to be a lot of misconceptions as to what they are and what is the difference between assessment and evaluation. And there is a definite distinction between assessment and evaluation. When we're taking a look at assessment, we're basically looking at just gathering of data. We are looking at the purpose of which we are gathering that data is to determine growth and areas for improvement in our instructional practices and improvement in student growth. We look at assessment on one hand as feedback from the student to the instructor about how the student is learning. When we look at assessment, we have something in complete contrast to that. Evaluation, while assessment is gathering the data, when we look at evaluation, we're assigning a grade. Yes, it is based sometimes on the data that we gather. It is sometimes based on assessment, so assessment and evaluation are definitely related, but we are not, every time we assess, we are not and we should not always be assigning a grade to everything that we assess. So the purpose then of evaluation is to report that achievement. When we talked about assessment, we were determining areas of growth for our own improvement as teachers and for the students' improvement. Whereas when we evaluate, we're just reporting achievement. Whether the evaluation is in terms of a standardized test or a classroom-based test, unit test, we are really just assigning a grade to something that they've done. So that's evaluation. Evaluation, assessment, we said, is feedback from the student to the teacher, whereas evaluation is feedback from the teacher to the student. Clear distinctions there between the two of them. We look at assessment and we can see that there are a variety of assessment techniques that we can use. And you probably know many of these. A lot of what I'm saying this afternoon are probably things that you know and that you've heard before, you know well. I certainly realize standing here that I'm not telling you, you're educators. I'm not telling you something that is brand new or should be brand new to everyone. What I'm trying to do is to clarify and put meaning to what you already know. If you think in terms of your own planning for the classroom, you talk about essential questions. And when I think of what I plan for today, I think of one of my essential questions as how do we see the differences between assessment and evaluation? I have several other essential questions that I'll be addressing during the course of the presentation, but that's a key. So when we look at different assessment techniques, we can look at things such as self-assessments. We can talk about student portfolios, classroom feedback. You're familiar with all of those, okay? So when we take a look at those techniques, we need to understand the whys of assessment so that we can be wise in using it, okay? And it's important to understand the whys in order that we are wise in using the assessments that we do use. Well, first, why? Why do we assess? Are we looking at seeing what they can do, what skills they've mastered? Or if you look at the little fella in the middle with his shirt and tie on, are we preparing them for their future? Are we preparing them so that they can go out into the business world at some point in time and have the skills that they need? Or are we preparing assessments because the students enjoy it? I see here a little chuckle there. How many of you enjoyed assessments when you went through school? I have at least one hand up. However, when we look at assessment as we should be looking at it today, shouldn't our assessments in a way be enjoyable? We look at performance assessments, we look at project-based learning, and don't we do a lot of assessment through those two vehicles? Hand a student or a group of students a box of Legos. Are they going to say to you, oh no, I don't want to play with these, I don't want to work with these? No, assessment should, at some point in time, be something that is enjoyable. When we take a look at that why of assessment, we often get the responses in looking at why we assess. We get the responses, well, we have to get those report card grades. To me, that's one of the worst things that ever existed, report card grades. We talk in education about what is the summit or the goal of what we do in the classroom. And at certain periods in time in the school year, we hand out report cards. And it's almost like a culminating point. But should it be? No. It should be a springboard for a new series of instruction. So again, I think it's good time for us to start talking and start looking in our schools at different types of assessment, different types of grading. There's a lot of talk right now about standards-based grading. It's something worth looking into at this point. If what we want to give feedback on is how well the students have mastered the skills that they've learned, we want to take a look at those types of grading. How many of you see this often? We give report cards because the parents want them. Anybody in the school where the parents don't want to know what the students are doing? And I would venture to say, without even looking for a show of hands, that in every one of your schools, the parents want your students to come home with 90s or all A's on the report card, right? Okay. Anybody have a school where they don't want you to do that? Or they don't want to compare the grades that you have with somebody else's? And they all want to know, well, why did he get an A and somebody else didn't get an A. And they were all ready to give you all the explanations. So sometimes we're dealing with satisfying parents as far as grades are concerned. Why do we give report cards? Why do we give grades? Because central office requires it. And I sometimes feel responsible when I get those kinds of phone calls asking about the report cards or the report card grades or the end-of-level testing grades. We also give assessments sometimes because it's a part of our program that we're using, which is well and good if we're using them in the right way. Okay? How many of you see this often enough? We want to rank our students. We get the standardized test scores back. What's the first thing we look at? Where they fell. Where our students fell. To me, when I look at those, they are not the best reasons for looking at assessments or the best use of assessments. The reasons that we should be looking at for assessments, first and foremost, formative assessments. Assessments that will give you practice at something. You do receive feedback, and while feedback in itself can be in a sense summative assessment, we also are looking at the formative assessment, which is important. Assessments can also be instructive. So it's another good reason. Using an assessment as an instructional piece. Taking the assessment after we've reviewed it, after we've looked at it, and using it as a teaching tool. Looking for ourselves as teachers, where are the error patterns? What do I need to reteach? It can be used as an instructional tool. I can also use assessment for monitoring. Checking to see that the students have made enough progress in the skill so that I can move on. Ranking, as I said before, that's not my favorite use of assessment because I think it sometimes puts some students at a disadvantage. And then again, we use summative assessment at the end of what we've done and the instruction that we've done in order to assign the grades that we are asked to give. Okay? So now we look at why are there so many different types of assessment. Different assessments have different purposes, and I see those purposes as being threefold. We have assessments for learning, assessments of learning, and assessments as learning. And it's important that we understand them in that context, that we know that assessments of learning are essential, just as essential as the assessments of learning. That the assessment that we do during the course of instruction is just as important as the assessment we do at the end of an instructional period. So we're going to take each one of those areas and we're going to take a little bit more of a look at it in depth. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do during the course of this presentation, I'm not going to do all the work. I'm going to have you do a little bit of interaction. So I would ask if you're sitting in a place where you're not near somebody else, just be prepared to find a partner somewhere, or if you want to stay by yourself, fine. I'm not going to force anybody to move. That's not my purpose, but I am at some point in time going to have you share with a partner or with someone else in a little group, because I think it's important that you hear not just my perspective, but since we are all educators, that you hear the perspective of other educators that are in the room, okay? Assessment for learning includes things such as formative diagnostic assessments. Now, what's a formative diagnostic assessment? You think of a pretest, you think of a test that's given for a specific purpose, for determining whether or not a student is ready to encounter a certain block of instruction, or we look at it as a teacher is given the chance at this point in time to adjust their classroom instruction based on the findings of the needs of the students that they've determined through the use of diagnostic assessment. So again, you're going to find using diagnostic assessments that the students are given feedback. Does not necessarily mean that they're given a grade, but they are given feedback on what they need and how they need to move forward. If you look at assessment for learning, there are 5 key strategies. Incidentally, I see people jotting things down. I did post this I posted a PDF of my PowerPoint on the NCEA website, so that all my notes will be there. I will add to them as time goes along. These are the 5 key strategies in assessment for learning. You take a look at them. Sharing learning expectations. How do you do that? This is where you share with the students what are the objectives of the lesson that you're going to be presenting. You're sharing with them essential questions at the beginning of a lesson so that you can get feedback at the end to see whether or not they understand or have understood the instruction based on that essential question. It involves feedback is an essential strategy. Self-assessment. Not just what you as the teacher can tell them about their learning, but what can they determine or can tell you about the learning. Okay? Peer assessment is also very important. Now, it's not as important or as doable in the primary grades because students at the primary level are not used to peer assessment. But even at the kindergarten level, students can help one another with little projects. I've seen it happen. It can be done. So when we look at the assessments, I'm going to ask you to turn for 2 minutes. I have my phone up here. We're going to stop at 2 minutes. And in a group of 2 or 3, I'd like you to select 2 of those characteristics of assessment for learning and see or share something that you think would help you to align a lot more of the assessment practices, those 5 assessment practices that I just showed you, to incorporate assessment for learning. I'll go back to look at some of the characteristics of assessment for learning and the strategies. And I'll give you 2 minutes to take and look at those and see how you can incorporate some of those practices into your classrooms. Okay? 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's make a deal because I have no prizes to give. But is there some brave soul in the audience who would like to share something or share one of the key strategies that you think could be incorporated more into classroom practices in your classroom or in your school that would be of benefit to your students by using more of that practice? I see one hand here, thank you. That's right. She said she's a reading specialist and she finds herself constantly assessing and asking the students to take a look at what they're doing to help them to move forward. Did I capture that in essence? Thank you. Okay. Now, as we move on, we want to take a look at assessment as learning. This is one of the pieces of assessment that I find in my own work with teachers, very few teachers are using. The assessment as learning. How do we take the tasks or activities that we're doing in the classroom or using in the classroom, how do we take those and allow the students the opportunity to use the assessments to further their own learning? There are so many things that they can do by doing those self-assessments and seeing what could I do better, okay? When we take a look at peer assessments are sometimes very difficult to do at certain grade levels, but it's important that we do them. But it's also important that we share with students a proper way to do a peer assessment, that it's not a criticism of what another student has done as much as it is a constructive way at looking or improving what they've done. And the teacher has to set the tone for that as to how those assessments are done. They do help the students to reflect on their own learning. And I think when we are in the mode of using self-assessment and peer assessment, one of the key things that we need to do is to share with parents that we will be using that practice in our classroom. It is important from the very beginning of a school year that we share that practice and how we are going to use it as a way of improving student learning. There are parents who will get upset if they think you're allowing other students to read their child's work or to interact and give critical feedback or constructive feedback regarding their child's work. So it's important that the parents begin having a very good understanding of why it's important and why it is necessary. Okay. We take a look of assessment as learning. Some of the techniques for assessment as learning are modeling, team teaching, brainstorming, persevering, revisiting things, observing, using resources. So it's important in looking at assessment as learning that we're looking at some key factors of the instructional process, such as self-reflection at the end of an instructional piece. Helping the students to collaborate. That's a key social skill as well as an instructional skill. Collaboration. There's nothing worse than going through 5 hours in the classroom and not ever having had the chance to interact with other students in the classroom. Gone are the days that the students sat in straight rows and kept their hands folded at the edge of their desk. I often think back in my own experience in teaching. My very first class, I had 84 first graders. And I can't imagine what I would have done if the students had to interact as they do today. I don't know that I would have lasted the full year with them. But you have to reflect on the needs of the students you have in your classroom at the time. We are addressing a whole different type of student than we addressed even 10 years ago. We have in our classrooms, we are no longer classrooms where one size fits all. We are classrooms where there are many different abilities within the same classroom. We have classrooms where there are students with special needs, and we sometimes take a look at ourselves and say, well, I am not a specialist or I'm not a special education teacher, but those students' needs have to be met. We've used terms recently such as differentiated instruction. Yes, they are all important in working, in setting goals for working with our students. Okay, we take a look, I'm going to skip that one, and move into assessment of learning. And I'm going to ask you to think for a minute about how you would use a task or an activity to measure, record, and report on a student's level of achievement other than a written pencil and paper test? What are some of the techniques you use besides pencil and paper? Or besides a computer-based assessment that would help you to record and report on a student's level of achievement? It's easy to give a spelling test with 20 words on it and assign a grade, because 20 into 100 is 5, and I can assign 5 points for every question. But is that the best way to determine whether or not the students have mastered those spelling words? So think of all the other practices that you could use in doing that. These assessments are known as summative assessments. You give an end of a book test, that is a summative assessment. You give an end of level test at the end of the school year, that's a summative test. Those are the tests that we use, that we generally assign grades to. When we take a look at those kinds of tests, we need to ask ourselves questions such as, are the learners able to create something new based on the instruction that they've been given, or based on the learning that they have received during this lesson, during this unit, during this planning period? Are they able to create something new? Not just something that they've always done. Think of something you taught last week, or something you observed in a classroom that was being taught last week. What are those students able to do new that they were not able to do before they had that period of instruction? When you take a look at another question is, to what is the degree of engagement or fascination with the topic? How many of you are math teachers? Anybody here a math teacher? Isn't that hard to really talk about engagement unless you yourself as the teacher are excited about the topic? Students can't get excited about topics unless you as a teacher present it as an exciting topic. Are the learners able to attach a mental image to the concept? If I'm teaching division of fractions, what's the mental image you have of division of fractions? Is it a picture of a numerical 1/2 divided by 1/2? Or is it a picture of a half of a pie that has been divided into halves? It's a very difficult concept. Division of fractions is a very difficult concept. But can the students attach a mental image to the concept through the instruction that they have been given? To what degree are the learners gaining knowledge? How well have they mastered the skills? We sometimes depend on our standardized tests for giving us levels of mastery. And it's important that we take advantage of the data that we get from that kind of assessment. To what degree are the learners developing skills in fluency? Fluency is essential in practically every content area. I can look at social studies. How fluent are they at reading maps? How fluent are they in science, at looking at tables and charts, or in using the scientific process? I take a look at the skills that they need to know and look at fluency and how well they've done that. When we take a look at the types of learning, and again, I'm looking at time, so I don't want to, belabor the time, but if I take a look at that, I would discuss the types of learning that would be used in your school, and this is perhaps something you could do with the faculty. And how is the information from those learnings used? How do I take the data? This is one of the things that I think is one of the weakest areas that we have. We take a test, we grade it, We put it in the student's take-home folder. It goes home to get signed, comes back. What do we ever do with it? It's one of the biggest mistakes we make in education. We do nothing with it. We need to start taking a deeper look at that data. And we need to start using it to plan our instruction. Okay. So if I were to go back to this graphic that I used earlier, and if I were to take a look, which one of these areas, or which of these areas could I categorize as assessment of learning, for learning, or as learning? Some of them would fit into more than one category, but it's important that we see the distinction between the three. Now, we ask ourselves the question, why is it important to use those varied assessment types? And there are questions that we can use for consideration, and among those questions would be, do our assessment practices make use of all three main purposes for assessment? I would suggest that when you go back to your school, or you go back to your own classroom, take a look and see how many times in the past month have you used assessment for learning? How many times have you used assessment as learning? How many times have you used a self-assessment? Okay? Or how many times have you used assessment of learning? If there is an imbalance, if you're using assessment of learning more frequently than the other types of assessment, I would suggest that you take a good look at how you can create a balance between the three types of assessment. The processes that you could use in your school would be varied depending upon the materials and resources you have in your school, and depending upon you as a teacher and your own creativity in working with the assessments. It's important that we take a look and reconsider some of the assessment practices that we are so used to, that we are constantly working with at the present time. If I take a look at some of those assessment practices, how do we gather and make use of data? When I first came into the position I'm in right now, I walked into my office and there was a closet there, and in that closet there were shelves and shelves of binders with standardized test data. Those binders were so dusty because they had been sitting on shelves and nobody even took the time to look at the data. When we take a look at that data, what is it we look for? And how do we use the data? That's important. We need also to take a look at how we prepare the assessments we're using. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. And do the rubrics that we use really reflect what we should be assessing? So if I'm looking at test results, and I know you can't see that because it's really small, what's the emphasis on? Is the emphasis in looking at our standardized test results, is it on ranking the students or on mastery of skills? Most standardized tests today give you two sets of data. They give you the normative data, and they also give you the criterion reference data. So if I am looking at the data that I need to use in helping improve instruction and improving students' skills, it is not going to be the normative data. Normative data really puts rankings on students. If I say a student is in the 95th percentile, all it really means is that they perform better than 95% of the students who took a test. It does not mean that they've mastered 95% of the work. That's important to understand. Parents do not understand that at all. One of the most misinterpreted pieces of data we get from standardized testing is the grade equivalent. Oftentimes, teachers misinterpret that, but parents are quick to misinterpret that. I have, at this point in time, I have almost 120 nieces and nephews. And as such, I'm the first one because I'm the educator in the family. I get the phone calls asking or telling me that Maggie is in grade, and she got an 8.3 grade equivalent on her reading test. So she's reading 8th grade work, and I'll say, no, she's not. It just means that she handled the 5th grade material as well as a student in the 3rd month of 8th grade would have handled that 5th grade material. That she handled it at a higher level of understanding and a higher level of proficiency, but she is not doing 8th grade work. That is often, very often misinterpreted in the understanding of standardized test results. Another thing that is misinterpreted or never used is the scaled score or the normal curve equivalent. In looking at your standardized test scores, how many people start right away focusing on the normal curve equivalents? Anybody here? Is that your first focus, is the normal curve equivalent? If you're a specialist, you might, because the normal curve equivalent shows growth from year to year. Your standard scores and normal curve equivalent show growth, and whether or not the student has shown growth from the last time they took a test. So we need to take a look at whether or not we are interpreting. And we also get national percentiles, we get local percentiles. Do your teachers know the difference? And when you use the different percentiles, when would you use a national percentile? You would, in my diocese, because of the demographics in my diocese, I would use a national percentile when I am applying for scholarships for a student, because our national percentiles tend to be higher. However, if I'm looking for my Title I fund students because of the demographics of my diocese, I might use the local percentiles because they're scoring lower in the local percentiles because the diocese as a whole has done well. But it's important that you know how to interpret those skills, those scores in testing. Okay, one more quick turnaround. Look at the list I have up here. And I would ask you to rank the following as to which is most important and which is least important. We have national percentiles, local percentiles, skills mastery levels, anticipated and obtained scores if you're using assessments that give you the anticipated and obtained scores, normal curve equivalents, scaled scores, grade equivalents. 2 minutes.
I would guess mastery levels. I mean, I think it depends on who you are, in the sense that, like, as a teacher, I'd be more interested on, like, the skills that you show. Like, have they hit the skills that I'm teaching? Whereas, like, I think from the administrator's perspective, if you're trying to, how does your school compare, the local and national perspective, you're going to be more interested in that. So our district is the one that's scored the test. So, I mean, I think, yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Okay, our 2 minutes are up. Can I just have a show of hands? I'm going to go through each one. If you just give me a show of hands as to which you think is most important among the list that I have here. National percentiles, local percentiles, skills mastery levels, anticipated and obtained scores, normal curve equivalents, scaled scores, grade equivalents. Okay, I have one more question for you. How many of you think that not one of them is more important than the others? I see a few hands raised, and that's basically the answer that I would use, because every one of them is used for a different reason. They all have their purpose. Many of you raised your hand when I said skills mastery level. And based on what I said earlier about looking at criterion reference scores, yes, I would prioritize that if I had to prioritize things. I would also prioritize anticipated and obtained scores. And for those of you who may not know what I'm referring to when I'm speaking of anticipated and obtained scores, if you're using a standardized test that also assesses students' ability, you may get results back that tell you what the child is capable of doing and what they are doing in relationship to their capabilities. A child may be capable of scoring at the 56th percentile, and they're scoring at the 76th percentile. That tells me that a child is an overachiever, okay, that they've done very well. So that, I would say, would be a very important score that I would look at. But every one of those scores, depending upon what you're looking for in interpreting the data, every one of those is important for a different reason, okay? When you're looking at the grade equivalents, it's important that they're interpreted in the correct way, but it's also important because it tells you a maturity level of where the students are at. A child who is in the 5th grade, who is handling the material as well as an 8th grader, is at a higher maturity level of learning than one who may be handling the same material at the 4th grade level. Okay, so that helps us with that. Now I'm going to have you look at a problem, and the problem is from one of our end-of-level assessments. And when we're constructing assessments, it's important that we have certain characteristics that we look at in the construction of our assessments. When we take that assessment, we want to take a look at whether or not the assessment is level appropriate. Is the language of the assessment appropriate for the level of the students? Is it based on a standard or based on an essential question that we have been addressing in our instruction? Is there a level of rigor to the question? Are the questions applicable to real life situations? And can a variety of strategies be used to answer the question, or as in this case, to solve a problem? Now I take a look at the problem I have here. Uncle Louie made $405.45 selling cheesesteaks. Can you tell him from Philadelphia? That's a Philadelphia tradition. Selling cheesesteaks one day. Tom was allowed to keep the cost of 5 cheesesteaks for his pay. How much did Tom make that day if 53 cheesesteaks were sold? Okay? I'm looking at it. Is it level appropriate? This was in a 5th grade assessment. According to the skills presented at that level, it was an appropriate question for that level. Okay? It is based on standards. Is there a level of rigor in that question?
Yes.
Would you say yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, it requires more than one step of thinking. Okay, it requires you more than a one-step process. So there is a level of rigor in it. Is there a real-life application? That's something people in real life would do, try to figure out how much money they're going to make, okay? And could a variety of strategies be used to solve a problem? Couldn't I use computation to solve a problem? I could use calculators. I could use a graphic organizer to solve a problem. I could use a diagram in some ways to solve that problem. So there are a lot of different ways that I could solve a problem, which is important that students have a variety of strategies that they are able to use. But when we take a look at those assessments, we also need to take a look at the rubrics. And I have seen so many rubrics that teachers have prepared, and I have some concerns about those rubrics that I'd like to share with you. The rubrics themselves do provide a common framework that encompasses the curriculum expectations. Now I notice there it says curriculum expectations. It just doesn't say the teacher's expectations. What are the learning expectations? So the rubric should be focused on what was to be learned. The rubric itself should be a guide to the development of high quality assessment tools, okay? And we need to help teachers to plan instruction for learning through the use of good rubrics. Well, I have two rubrics here for you to look at, and I'd like you to look at them carefully and tell me whether or not you think they are good rubrics. And if you take that they, go backwards. If they take a quality representation of student mastery of work. When I take a look at this rubric, it's asking for you to, are there equations describing the problem situation? That's accounting for 25% of the student's grade. Interpretation of results. And this is something that we're finding more and more important in the use of constructive response assessments. How do they interpret the results in the assessment? Do they justify their results? And the last column, presentation. Do you think that's a good rubric? Parts of it might, I think. Is there anything you would take out of that rubric? Yeah. I'm having a hard time hearing you. It's not clear. It's not really clear. And also, when you're using any kind of a rubric, the student should see the rubric before they see the assessment. A child reading that might not know what you mean by minor inaccuracies, okay? A 5th grade child, if that were the rubric that was being used, might not understand that. So that's a very good point that you're bringing up. Anything else anybody see there that you would not include in that rubric? 0? Yes. No attempt at all. What about the last column, presentation? If this is a rubric for a math problem, should presentation be there?
There's nothing in the original problem about presentation.
No, there is nothing in the original problem about presentation, and presentation is not a math skill. Presentation is a work skill or a study skill. So there should not be in that rubric anything that is not a work or study skill related to the problem itself. When you take a look at the next rubric that I have here, I find that that's a problem with this next rubric. The next rubric is a holistic rubric, looking at it on a scale from 1 to 4. When I take a look at that rubric, it says the assignment is completed correctly and contains additional outstanding features. Does that tell me anything at all about solving the problem? So how can I, if I were using this rubric as a rubric for the student's effort, that's a completely different thing. Or as a rubric for the student's study skills, as to how well they have prepared their work, that's a different thing. But this would not be a good rubric to use for a math assessment, such as the question I just showed you, okay? It's very important when you are looking at the rubrics that there are a focus on the several categories that relate to knowledge and skills. So when you are developing rubrics, you need to take a look at these 4 categories. You need to take a look at what was the knowledge and understanding that is being assessed. That needs to be a part of the rubric. The level of thinking that went on, the process of thinking that went on in the solution of the problem, or if it were a scientific experiment, what thinking went on, what was the thinking process that could be shared by way of a constructive response. How does the student communicate their answer? Years ago, I worked with an older sister who I have great respect for, Sister Rosanita. Sister Rosanita, when we were working with her developing problems, she would always say to us, why do I need to know this? If I were a student, why do I need to know this? Communication is extremely important. The communication skills of how the students can reflect on what it is they're doing and how the students can give that feedback to you. The more and more we see our standardized testing, more and more being produced with constructive responses. So it's important that communication be a part of that, of those categories, the categories of knowledge and skills that are used in developing rubrics. We also need to look at how well the student has applied the skill that they've learned to the response in the question. Okay, how do they use knowledge and skills? Also to make connections with other things. If I could extend that problem, I might take it and say, well, suppose he earned $572. How much would the student make? Okay? Okay, why is it important to shift our focus when we take a look at assessment? Obviously, you're here because you have questions or you have concerns about the use of assessments. And hopefully, you're able to pull from what I'm expressing this afternoon, or I'm sharing with you this afternoon, 7 important principles, 7 fundamental principles of assessment that are key to having quality assessments in your school or in your classroom. If we want our assessments to be valid, we want them to be reliable, and if our focus is that those assessments are going to lead to the improvement for all students, and that teachers use practices and procedures that will, first of all, be fair, transparent, and equitable for all students. They need to be fair, transparent, and equitable for all students. We oftentimes will come up, because we talked earlier about the fact that our classrooms are not one size fits all, right? Sometimes you have a student who has a reading difficulty. And if I'm teaching a math class or I'm teaching a science class and a child has a reading difficulty, am I assessing the reading in that content area? Or I am assessing what they understand in that content area. So it's important that I be equitable and give those students the accommodations that they may need to give the feedback to me. That's important that I am assessing their understanding of that skill. So for some students, I may have to read a word problem to them. Is that not being fair? For that student it is. Other students might not see that. But if the other student is capable of reading the problem for themselves, they should read the problem themselves, or they should read the scientific experiment themselves, okay? Our The second fundamental principle is that our assessment should support all students, including those with special education needs, those who are learning the language of instruction. More and more we are in situations, we have one school in Philadelphia that has 46 nationalities in the school. We have to be cognizant of that. We have to be cognizant of the fact that every child coming into our classroom speaking English may or may not speak English at home, because we live in a very diverse society, and we have to be aware of those needs as we are preparing our assessments, as we are administering assessments, and as we are looking at how to evaluate those assessments. So we need to be very cognizant of that, and we need to prepare ourselves for that. It's one thing to be cognizant, but it's also important to be equipped with the tools to deal with it if it exists in our schools. Okay. It's important also that our assessments are carefully planned to relate to the curriculum expectations. One of the things that I always ask our principals is that when they are looking at their teachers' planning tools, that they see that the assessment is always prepared before the actual lesson plan is developed. What is it? There is a Dennis the Menace cartoon that I always liked that says he's standing at the classroom door, and he's looking up at the teacher, and he says to the teacher, "What did we learn today?" My mom always asks me. And when you think of it, unless we have determined what it is we're going to ask them at the end of a period of instruction, so it's very important that we prepare assessments before we actually prepare the instruction, so we know what it is we're going to ask the students to give back to us, okay? It's important that, and I mentioned this earlier, it's important that everything we do with assessment and grading is communicated clearly to the students and to their parents at the beginning of the school year. If you have assessment practices that you're using in your building as a whole, or if you are, and I would really recommend that you have consistent practices throughout your building, because it is very frustrating for parents to have a child go from one class to the next class and the assessment practices are completely different. It's important to have an assessment plan or a set of assessment strategies that you use as a school, but also that the students know what those strategies are, what their expectations are from every assessment, but it's also important that the parents know, and that this should be communicated to both students and parents in the very beginning of the school year, and at other appropriate times during the school year to remind them of what those practices are. The fifth principle is that assessment practices should be ongoing, should be varied in nature. If I'm giving a spelling test, it shouldn't be every week the same pattern of spelling 20 words correctly. It should be a variety of strategies. If I'm giving a math assessment, I should not be giving black line master worksheets all the time as my math assessment. There should always be varied practice in every assessment. Every assessment should have some items that the children are maintaining, as well as the items that they have learned within that instructional period. Every assessment should be prepared in a way that the easier questions should be addressed initially at the beginning of the assessment, so that a child is not frustrated. A child who becomes frustrated at the very beginning of an assessment will not complete the assessment. It's important that every child has something they can grasp at the very beginning, so that it will help them to move forward, that they have accomplished something. There should also be multiple opportunities for the students to demonstrate the full range of their knowledge of any skill, not limited to just, as I said before, one pencil and paper assessment. There can be many ways that you can learn whether or not they have mastered a skill. The sixth fundamental principle, that we give feedback. It's essential that we give ongoing, descriptive feedback that's clear, specific, meaningful, and timely to support their learning and achievement. The feedback can't be just a number at the top of the paper. The feedback has to sometimes be in terms of a conference with a student and taking a clear look at whether or not the student has really mastered the concept. So, and there are other ways of doing that. You may have, if you're in a primary grade, you may have a teacher aide in the classroom who can help you with those little conferences to help them to understand what it was that they had not mastered. And finally, the seventh fundamental principle is that students develop self-assessment skills to enable them to assess their own learning, and that they need to start taking a look at that assessment and setting goals for themselves. Whether you do an end-of-level assessment, for them to take a look at the assessment results and set goals for what they want to do to improve their own learning. And what they need to plan for the next steps in their learning, because they can't move forward unless they understand what it is they don't know. And to move forward by planning to improve what it is they don't know before moving forward. As I move on, just a final word. I know at 4:15 in the afternoon, it's not easy to be sitting here listening to such a, we'll just say it, not a boring topic, but a hard topic, an abstract topic like assessment. We weren't doing jumping jacks or anything like that, and it is hard. I know at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I go home, I usually sit down in a chair and I'm sound asleep by the time, I've read or played one game on my iPad or something like that. So I just want to thank you for your attention, because I do know it's difficult to be here at this hour of the afternoon. And I just hope that I've been able to share with you at least one thing that you can take. As I said at the beginning, what I shared with you should not have been new to all of you. What I was hoping to share was to put it in a context that you would see the assessment for learning, by learning, and of learning, and to see some of the best practices as far as assessment is concerned. I'd also like to thank William Sadler Company for sponsoring me here today. Although I'm not here to present anything, but they were able to sponsor my coming here today, for which I am very grateful. And I just thought I'd finish off with one last thought. Students need to see usefulness of what they are learning. And in this little family circus cartoon, he's looking at his mother and saying, I have 5 right and 5 wrong is batting 500. And that's really good. So if you went to the Cardinals game last night and somebody was batting 500, they were doing pretty good. And I feel like I can relate to Bill King was taught by our sisters back in Philadelphia, so I feel like the family circus is something that I can relate to in many ways. Not just the little kids that I brought with me today, but in the presentation of all those little kids and all those little darlings that you will be going back to your schools with. Thank you for being here. I know I'm about 5 minutes late, but